Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast, can at times contain adult language and themes. It is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Digital Dissection podcast, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties, creators, and topics. We are your humble hosts, Joe and Mark, two pop culture nerds dedicated to telling entertainment history before it's forgotten too soon. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, and our blog for more information on the show. We also love to hear from you, so why not write us at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to dissecting. You know that idea or that concept that was thrown out there that technically like our radio and TV broadcasts just go out in all directions and they never stop. They just keep going so that somewhere, sometime, eventually, if there's life out there, they will get our broadcasts from early TV and radio and they'll have no idea that they're fake.
What have we actually sent out into space? Did we actually send Gilligan's Island out there? I can't
I
even
mean,
remember if we did.
probably. I mean, is it on the gold disc? Did we slap that into Voyager?
God, I have no idea. I'll be honest with you, Joe. I'm getting to that age now where finally I don't remember if the things I reference now are within 5 years or 30. So
Well, I think you can just safely, whatever you do, when you think something happened, multiply it by like 8. And
ugh.
that's when it actually happened. 5 years ago, nope, it was 40. Older than both of us. That's bad math because I am not good at math. Therefore, we should pick a safer number.
This is why
Smaller than 8.
Joe does not teach math, for those who don't.
I teach algebra.
Oh, those poor sons of bitches. They
Been
don't
doing
know
it
what's
wrong
happening.
on purpose the whole year.
Well, what the fuck are these guys talking about tonight? We're talking about Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
If those of you that didn't quite remember this little ditty back in 1999, and honestly, Joe, what I was considering starting with here was, if you're sitting in the IMAX theater, they try to think back to the first time you saw a movie in IMAX.
Yes.
What kind of thoughts came to you? Like, what were you thinking as you sat there looking at this massive screen?
Jesus Christ, am I actually in a helicopter right now? I think is what I thought when my first time I ever went to an IMAX. Because I went to there's a museum in Milwaukee that had an IMAX screening in it, and like they did this like opening thing before what they showed, and it was literally like a bunch of like random clips of things filmed in IMAX, and one of them was a helicopter going over a city, and it would like move and sway, and I found like along with like my classmates, they were actually like moving with the damn camera. So that's what I
Yeah.
thought. I'm like, fuck, are we in a helicopter right now? All 33 of us hanging out?
Hmm. See, the first time I saw an IMAX, it was like an ocean exploration type of thing,
Ah, okay.
like the perspective of a fish type of
Mhm.
thing. And I thought, man, that coral looks delicious. But
I
you
don't know
can't
why
eat
more
coral.
fish are eating it. I don't know why they're not.
The bright colors reminds you of like cereal, on a Saturday morning.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
no, what I was referring to with IMAX was actually David Howard, who wrote the
Mhm.
screenplay for Galaxy Quest. Because one of the first times he sat down in IMAX, back when it was still flashy and brand new,
Yeah.
he was sitting there coming up with this proto idea slash
Mhm.
design for what Galaxy Quest would be. But what do you think he named that idea, Joe?
Did he name it Galaxy Trekkers?
Not quite, a little too on the nose, potentially. He named it Captain Starshine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
okay. Mhm. I could see why
honestly,
that one didn't stick.
yeah, it sounds like some strange 70s porno that I want to watch, but I will refrain from doing. Just doesn't quite
Yeah.
land.
I mean, it seems like a guy who has a sanctum solarium, instead of a fortress of solitude, and he's a
Yeah.
little creepy, little creepy.
Stares at you a little too long, maybe holds the handshake a bit too much type of thing, you know?
Yeah, like he holds it strong with one hand, and then slowly moves the other arm up your arm. You're just like, I don't know what's going on anymore. I thought we were just saying hello.
Yes.
Oh, I signed on for much more than I bargained for.
Apparently, we're getting friendlier than we thought possible tonight. But yeah, that's what Mr. David
Mhm.
Howard was envisioning the first time he went and saw IMAX. He was coming up with
Okay.
this idea for what would become Galaxy Quest, and he said specifically that the
Mhm.
idea of having these, like, washed up sci-fi stars just popped in there,
All
you
right,
know?
just popped in there.
Yeah, like marshmallows at Camp Wakanda,
Wakanda.
once
Mhm.
again referencing Ghostbusters because we can't seem to not
Nope,
fucking do that for a
nope.
week.
Every episode.
Well, that's what he did, and so this idea of being, like, pigeonholed Star Trek actors
Mhm.
just got in there, started
Yeah.
running wild,
Mhm.
and this is something I found really interesting about this. He said once that happened, the idea practically wrote itself. He didn't even really have to get creative.
Well, when you think of this movie, like, it all feels natural. Like, it legitimately feels like if you took the original cast of Star Trek and this happened, this is exactly what would happen. Like, this is what they would do. You would have, William Shatner just completely falling in love, although that would have had to happen to him in his, like, 30s or 40s because now he's been to space and he admitted he hates it. It's all bad.
Really?
Um,
He hated it
yeah.
that much?
Yeah, he didn't like it. He's like,
Oh,
"No,
man.
I'm not going back." If he could Yelp that, he'd put a review of, like, 2 on there.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah, if this had happened to him in his prime or, just beyond his prime, um, same thing. Like, we would
Huh.
have gotten this exact same thing happening to the original cast of Star Trek.
So it's like Shatner was expecting, Sleep Number, but he got a waterbed instead.
Mhm.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, we'll tell you what, the better reception occurred when this script began getting bounced around Hollywood, okay?
Mhm.
Now, Mark Johnson would end up getting his hands on this. Now, does Mark Johnson sound familiar to you?
I can't say no because his first name is your first name and his last name is rather generic.
Very true.
So I'll associate with him no matter what. But he's probably done things I'm aware of. I'm just not aware he did it.
Well, he is the producer of Rain Man, if you're familiar with that
Ah,
movie.
yeah, yeah.
Very
That's
solid
it
Dustin
was
Hoffman.
it was the movie that definitely was the first kick in the pants to my hometown that I remember when Tom Cruise declared that Kmart sucks. And that was like our only store that we had in our tiny town. It's like, well, that means my town sucks by association because all we have is a Kmart.
Yeah, but Joe, little known secret, the K in Kmart stood for crap, okay?
That's true. It was
So
just ahead of the curve and started with a K to sound cool.
I g I gotta take that back. I did enjoy Kmart mostly because a lot of them had Little Caesars in them, and
Yep,
as
the
you know,
win.
Joe, someone as crazy as me could only go to one place that had bread that was equally as crazy,
Mhm.
and which is why I love that place. But
Not a
regardless,
sponsor of the podcast, by the
not a
way.
sponsor, no,
No,
and we're not
no.
talking about Hot and Ready's because God damn it, it's
Ugh.
just ugh.
Also describes me at any given moment. Just kidding, not really. Not at
Yeah, if
all.
if they had a pizza called Sweaty and Ready, that would be me. Uh, but anyway,
Okay,
Mr.
alright.
Mr. Mark Johnson, he falls in love with this idea
Mhm.
of, like you mentioned, Joe, aliens just grabbing this signal, out of space and thinking that it was
It's
real
real.
the entire time.
Which also makes for just one of the best scenes in this whole movie when they ask if they didn't think Gilligan's Island actually happened, and then just instantly, "Those
Yeah,
poor people."
those poor people. Yeah. Oh, god.
Oh my god. Okay, so looking into this then is that when it was first developed and first made, not first made, but first being pitched, moved around, the ideas shuffling about, is that we didn't have the director who actually made this movie. Instead, we had the 80s great Harold Ramis himself brought on for the director of this movie. And he was envisioning something very different than what we got. He was thinking more Spaceballs with Star Trek than kind of this. It's hard to even call this a spoof movie because for as much that you think it spoofs Star Trek, it spoofs much more of the people who were in Star Trek than Star Trek, with a lot of nods to the genre and to the series throughout. But so Ramis had this idea this was going to be the spoof, and he wanted basically action stars to be comedic instead of having comedians be the action stars, which is what we see in this movie. And I think that actually turns out for the better because if you think, Mark, how many action stars really nail comedy well?
I mean, right off the top of my head, I can't think of many outside of a very specific person named Arnold, last name
Yep.
Schwarzenegger.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I don't know. That is a really tough one for me to
Mhm.
to get my head wrapped around because for the time period at least,
Yeah.
right? Like this is before The Rock was really making some of these
Exactly.
like
Mhm.
yeah, like before he was making these I don't wanna call them self-referential, but like
Mhm.
very
They're
self-aware.
aware. Yeah. He knows what
Yeah.
he's doing, and he's damn good at it, so he can keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is
Mhm.
before that really started. So I think even back then, much tougher sell, you
Yeah.
know, especially
Especially
because yeah,
I'd
because
say, look at the action stars of the time. Like you said, you got Schwarzenegger there. You put Stallone in this as
yeah,
well.
no.
So, that's not gonna work.
Yeah. He's good for a one-liner or two, but
Yeah.
you can't expect him to carry the comedy throughout. No,
Never
absolutely
give
not.
up.
Yeah.
Never surrender. It's not
Mm,
gonna work. Not gonna
mm-mm.
work well.
Plus, people thought his dread was lame, and maybe that's the case. So,
Man, and then I still can't believe how much we actually liked Dread when we looked back and watched it again. That's still, like, boggling me. Like, I fully expected I love the movie when I was a kid. That's because like, when you're a kid, if it's got flashing lights and cool looking shit, you're gonna love it. But, like, I'm gonna hate this watching it again, and I didn't hate it. I don't get why I didn't hate it.
I mean, I think we didn't hate it was because this movie ended up becoming a love letter to, like original Star Trek fans, the original series, and borrowing a bit from Buck Rogers, which was, long before either of us were sci-fi fans.
Mhm.
But I mean, they did. I think that was the better balance because a lot of the rumors and some of the stuff that came out about Ramis being attached to this was that he wanted a dark film.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
why? And I just can't see that ever possibly being a successful thing for this movie.
No, no, and granted, the movie we got is dramatically different than what was even originally shot,
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
the intention for it was shot was different, but we'll get to that in a bit. Um, but, like, you can even tell from, like, the original casting ideas that this was gonna be a different movie. I mean, I maybe back then more than now because what initially Ramis wanted Alec Baldwin to be Peter Quincy Taggart.
Which yeah, I can't see him
Mhm.
ever fitting into Peter, Quincy, Quincy,
Quincy,
Quincy,
Quincy, Quincy,
Taggart,
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 Taggart, Taggart, Taggart.
Taggart.
But and even then, like, so eventually, there's actually a list of other people that were considered because, as we know, Alec Baldwin doesn't get it. But then other names like Kevin Kline gets
Yeah,
thrown into the mix. Bruce Willis,
yeah.
just recently retired, thrown into the mix. Sugar Tits himself, Mel Gibson,
Mm.
is in there. Tim Robbins and Steve Martin. All people who were considered and thought of for this role before Tim Allen signs on.
Which is where Harold Ramis decides to step away from this.
Mhm.
I don't know if he just hated Tim Allen or something, or maybe he didn't buy into the idea of tool time, you know?
Maybe. Maybe that was it. Maybe he's like the whole, "Oh!" Maybe he
Yeah.
hated that. He's like, "That
Maybe he
sound
thought
comes on and I lose my mind. I can't do it."
maybe he was a Richard Karn fan, maybe he thought Al was the real star, I don't know, maybe,
And
but
maybe he just really liked Al.
yeah,
Really
yeah.
liked Al.
But that's where he finally
Mhm.
withdraws, and a lot of people have just made that, like, clear-cut distinguishing thing that Tim Allen gets attached, Harold
Mhm.
Ramis is like, "Fuck this shit, I'm
Deuces.
out."
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck just happened, but I'm getting out of here.
Yep.
So,
Mhm.
and it's just it's so strange to me because the cast of this movie as it came together, because a lot
Mhm.
of it came together once Ramis left. We got Dean
Yep.
Parasot who comes in here
Mhm.
and he fills out, the rest of the folks that end up being in it. And just looking at the cast of this movie, if people haven't seen this film, which honestly I just feel bad
Mhm.
for you, and
Oh my god, watch it. You have to watch this movie.
yeah,
And look at you said look at the cast, even, like, as you go through the cast, originally, another really big name in this movie, Sigourney Weaver, I think when she was interested in the movie when she heard the idea, and initially she was told no because they didn't want science fiction actors attached to the movie. Like, "We don't want anyone who's, like, a known science fiction person here." Um, we just don't think it's gonna work that way. But she insisted, saying that it's the people who are in science fiction that will know the genre and know what's good about it and know what also is good to make fun of about it that you will want to have attached to this movie.
which is this is why I thought the addition of Alan Rickman was
Mhm.
was amazing for this movie because for one, Alan Rickman wanted to get away from being typecast as villains and
Yep.
being
Mhm.
pushed off of Japanese named towers. And so
Mhm.
what was interesting about him being attached to this was that he immediately fell in love with the humor and he thought this script was amazing, despite not really being a big sci-fi fan himself.
Yeah. And I think what also attracts him to the role is the fact that you've got his character, Alexander Dane, is sick of being typecasted.
I
Is a part
mean,
of it. Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I think what was perfect for this was that when he got attached to this movie, very similar to what happens when Sean Connery gets attached to The Last Crusade. Not saying that uh because there's a lot of comedy between the two of those movies, right?
Mhm.
But what he ended up doing in this movie was helping provide a lot of the logic as to why actors or some of these characters behave the way they do.
Mhm.
So he helped build a lot of the things that you end up seeing in this movie because Alan Rickman said a lot that actors kind of have this inner dialogue amongst themselves about
Mhm.
how ridiculous the things are happening in front of them and how ridiculous the industry is. And so that was one of the things I thought he brought to the table here, which was not always well known, but very important. Like he helped provide a lot of logic and reasoning behind why the characters act the way they do.
Yeah, and that was something that I think and as our conversation will go on, hit certain points of the movie, I'll bring up more. That's something that the cast was really, really big on, was making sure that this movie worked at every possible level. And actually, like, believe it or not, Tim Allen was really, really big on making sure that sci-fi elements and parts that work well in science fiction still happened in this movie. Things that weren't written or accounted for initially. He's like, whoa, 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 hold up, hold up, hold up. If this were actually a science fiction set, this should happen. Therefore, our actors should think about it as they approach the situation. And then, like, he would say this, and the rest of the cast would be like, okay, I've got something, let's roll with it. And then they would make the scene and it would come out to some of the best parts of this movie. And one of the most like iconic parts of this movie too, which we'll get to eventually. But speaking of that Tim Allen involvement and his dedication to doing this and his work on it, um, quick little cycle back to Harold Ramis is that Ramis did go and see the movie after it was all said and done, and did say that he was very happy that he was wrong about this movie and that Tim Allen did a great job as Peter Quincy Taggart.
Really makes you kind of disappointed that that even went down.
Hmm.
Like just knowing the comedic minds that were involved in this movie, because obviously we mentioned Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver. She was already a veteran in the
Hmm.
industry at this point. Same goes for Alan Rickman. But then you have folks like Tony Shalhoub, Sam Rockwell, Daryl Mitchell. I mean, just the core cast of this movie.
Yeah.
I just can't believe that they were able to get them together for this.
And Daryl Mitchell, like I think he before this, I think his the biggest thing he had was Home Fries, right? Which he worked on
With
um,
Parasite,
with
yeah.
Parasite, yeah. And other than this, another name I want to throw in there. is Enrico Colantoni,
Oh, of course.
who, if you're not familiar with him, he plays Malthazar in this movie. So he's the head of our. I was gonna literally legitimately call them termites instead of thermians. Like I
Just
almost
left it.
lost it there for a second, but he's the head of the of the Thermians. And also, by the way, if you're a Canadian TV fan, he was the head of the elite police team on Flashpoint, who he starred alongside my childhood crush of Amy Jo Johnson, the original Pink Ranger,
Yeah.
throwing that out there. But he did such a good job in his audition for Malthazar that the casting director actually did something that's usually a really big no, and that they were, like, basically hooked on him right away. It's so that when other people went to audition for Thermian parts, they showed the actors Enrico's audition tape and said, "This is how Thermians act. This is how you need to portray the role."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how transformative his
Mhm.
his audition was, and I mean, everybody has said this too behind that.
Yep.
Um, but hey, I honestly think it's one of the strongest points of the movie, just how
Mhm.
strange this alien race behaves because they don't know what we're like.
Yeah.
They only know what
Mhm.
they've seen in the TV shows or the
Yep.
historical documents, right?
And even, like, watching them move around is so, like, when you like, something I definitely didn't appreciate when I was younger, because like, watching them walk, you're just thinking, "Oh, they don't know how to walk. They're trying to be human. How funny." But when you watch them, their hands are always, like, cupped and kind of moving this weird, like, up and down. It's like, that's because they have tentacles. They don't
Yeah.
know how arms are supposed to work, so they just move like they're rigid tentacles. I'm like, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Like every motion they have, everything they do, that weird, like, monotone harmonic voice thing that they have, like, all of it just, like, mirrors what they actually are, but poorly trying to disguise it as humanoid looking things. So it's just well thought of, and a lot of, like, other mannerisms were, like, thought of as they were filming. So you had people like Tim Allen and Alan Rickman actually comment on how amazed and slightly frustrated they were to actually work alongside them, because, like, they were coming up with some of the stuff on the fly, and they had to act around it. They're
Yeah.
like, it was incredible, like, because it's well done, it's great, but we didn't see it coming a lot of times. So we
Yeah.
just had to work with it as it came along.
Well, this is one of the strengths of this movie is that they dedicated an actual like school
Mhm,
to the Thermian actors that you had to go through this kind of like what The Walking Dead does with the zombie behavior that people have to adapt to.
mhm.
All the extras and stuff. Yeah, these people on the Thermian side, the alien race, they had to go to an actual boot camp for how to behave like Thermians.
That's fantastic, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just like when you
Mhm,
have like a movie about Marines and they all go off to boot camp,
mhm.
you had your Thermian boot camp.
That's
So
brilliant.
yep, that's why that distinct and very unique look exists because
Mhm,
they all went through that. So, one of the things about this movie though that does tend to hit these top 10 lists in
mhm.
the forgotten or, pop culture that we just didn't quite know a lot
Yeah.
about was the R-rated version of this movie
Ah, mhm,
that we talked about a little bit, that there's a lot of different versions, a lot of different iterations and things that changed along the way. So it's kind of a mixture of hearsay, some of it's myth,
mhm,
but according to Sigourney Weaver herself,
mhm.
right? And Lindsay Collins, who was the producer of the unfortunate box office bomb, John Carter. um,
Oh, John Carter.
yeah. Well, from Weaver herself, she mentions that there is an R-rated director's cut of this movie
Mhm.
that's just chock full of all kinds of sex and adult language.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, even Darren Mitchell, even I think he said in a documentary about this movie, is that he's like, "It's gotta be out there somewhere because we were cussing constantly on set, on takes and
Yeah,
everything." And when you think about it, it does make sense because, again, the initial plan for this movie isn't what we got. The reason why we got the version that we did is because while this movie was in post and they were looking at wrapping it up, DreamWorks wasn't even sure they're actually going to go forward with it any more than they did. Past just wrapping, they shot it. We might test the movie, we might toss it. We don't know what we're going to do. And then basically, who I forget the company that made Stuart Little, the movie with the tiny, mouse that could talk,
Yeah.
voiced by Michael J. Fox. Well, that was out, and, like, that's seeded to, like, hit out as a family movie. We don't have anything in the slot at this time. We have Galaxy Quest. You could throw that out there in that position and have it compete with Stuart Little. And because that was DreamWorks' idea that this was gonna now be a family movie, they had to edit out so much of what was originally there. A lot of Alan Rickman's apparently a lot of Alan Rickman scenes had to be cut because of suggestive movement or dialogue or something where he has stuff taken out. Obviously, there's the very famous scene in the movie with Sigourney Weaver when they're watching the Chompers,
Yeah, but
and
the
this is
the
this episode was badly written.
yeah.
But
Well, but hold on a second now, that is a
Mhm,
mixture of fact and fiction to an extent
mhm,
because what they ended up doing with that scene and the reason why it looks as strange as it does, for folks that have seen this and who haven't,
mhm.
there's a very distinct part where Sigourney Weaver clearly mouths, "Well, fuck that," but it was dubbed over with, "Well, screw that."
Screw it. Mhm,
And so it does play into this, like, R-rated myth, right?
mhm.
But as you mentioned, Columbia Pictures put out Stuart Little right around the
Yep.
same time, which oddly enough, its screenplay was, written by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh, no
Uh,
way. What was the
yeah.
twist in that movie? Because he wasn't like a real person stuck in a mouse's body.
I don't know. I don't know.
Or it wasn't like we were the mice and he's the human.
Eh,
That wasn't the thing.
I mean, I've heard of stranger things, right?
Weirder things are out there, like how an alien that can jump from rooftop to rooftop gets locked in a fucking old ass pantry. Can't
Eh,
get out of there, can't kick the door down.
the perfect
Bizarre
deception.
twist.
Well, but the point here, though, is as you mentioned, you've got this competition with Stuart Little in a sense to
Mhm,
out-family the other family movie. So that's what ends up happening. DreamWorks basically tells them, "Hey, you need to edit these things so that we can keep this
mhm.
PG." And that's where this, according to at least Sigourney Weaver, this is where they redub that line.
Yeah.
And apparently she even kind of flubbed the direction of what her mouth was supposed to mimic so
Mhm.
that you could really tell this is clearly a fuck that moment and not a screw that
Yeah.
moment.
And even Paraso said that he purposely does the dub poorly so you can still clearly see her say fuck. He's like, "The delivery was perfect. Like, it was amazing, it was hilarious, it was exactly what the movie needed, and I was told I couldn't keep it, so this was a bit of protest on my part that I just dubbed over it poorly." And I have to admit, like, I remember I watched this movie on a field trip, I think in, like, the 8th grade, and I remember seeing that, and I'm like, "Wait, she did not say 'screw this.'" There's that's not what her mouth did.
Yeah, based on what I know about the English
Mhm.
language, that is not the
No.
sound that that movement makes.
Mm-mm.
But oh, but you know,
Mhm.
kind of rounding out some of the, some of the behind the scenes and maybe some of the firsts for this film.
Yeah,
Um, this is the first film that Justin Long and Rainn Wilson
that's
both appeared
true.
in.
Cinematic debuts.
Yeah, so for
Mhm.
those of you who kind of, well, if you witnessed any of the early to mid 2000s, Justin Long was practically in everything.
All the things. Herbie
Yeah,
Fully Loaded, Dodgeball, um,
yeah. Drag Me to Hell,
Drag Me to Hell, Jeepers
Accepted.
Creepers,
Yeah,
Accepted, yep. Mhm.
he was basically like getting sand in your house after you go to the beach. You just can't get it out.
He
And
got in there all nice and deep like, just like that weird trucker guy wanted him to.
oh yes, get in there, oh nice and deep, like yeah, yeah. And this was a
Mhm.
pre The Office Rainn Wilson.
Yep.
And he actually one of the things about him in this movie, he mentioned that he was so nervous, and there's some deleted scenes
Mhm.
in this movie that are still on like the DVD cut. Uh, yeah, he was so nervous that he could barely get through half of the stuff he was supposed to do. Seriously.
Which I'm even trying to remember, like, how many speaking lines does Rainn Wilson have in this movie?
Well, he's in the limousine
Yep.
with Tim Allen, in the
Mhm.
very beginning.
Yes.
But apparently he had more lines that were cut.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so and the same goes for our friend of the podcast, Dean Bahar,
Yeah,
by the
poor
way.
Dean. 'Cause you see Dean in, like he's in the background of, like they're in the engineering room when they're about to blow, the beryllium sphere. You see him just standing there, and
No, he
it's
he he also hugs Tony Shalhoub once they figure
oh,
out the solution to how to,
mhm.
fix the beryllium issues.
Which, by the way, like, looking at if we could take a small sidestep into Tony Shalhoub here for a little bit,
Yeah.
because this is another, like, he originally, auditioned for Guy Fleegman
Yeah,
and didn't get
yeah.
it, lost it to Sam Rockwell, and then was ready to step away from the movie, and they're like, "No, no, 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 we want you to come back and read for Quan." And he's like, "Are you serious? Like, this character's name is clearly Asian, and I'm not Asian. Like, this doesn't seem right at all." And like, no, 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 no. Like, well, we still want you to be in the movie. We want you to read for it. And he did it, and he loved it. And again, because of like the massive shift in what the movie was supposed to be, they had to change a lot of what he was doing. Um, and again, like part of the reason for like keeping him in there is that commentary on how like Hollywood would just cast white people to be clearly not white people, even though, like, Shalob is he's like a
He's
white
he he's Lebanese. Yeah,
Lebanese, yes, there we go.
yeah.
But yeah, in the opening scene, when you see, like, the original Galaxy Quest show, like, you see him squinting, like, it's a stereotypical bad, like, Asian look. But anyway, they read a lot of his humor, and a lot of it is just Shalob making it up as he goes along, and when it comes to that hug, he was specifically told to not do that.
Oh,
And he did
but
it anyway, like, never mind, that's
but
great.
it really plays into, once again, this, like, rewritten vision of what they
Mhm,
wanted him to do for this, because initially in this, like, more darker and more adult version of the film, he was supposed to be like a stoner,
yeah,
which explains why he's got that, that strange laid back behavior that doesn't
mhm,
impact him, but it seems to impact everybody else in the movie,
yeah,
right?
and, like, every major thing that should be, like, have you think, like, that was out there or this was really weird, he's just like, "Oh, that's a thing."
Yeah, like
Just
like when they're getting attacked and they open the airlock and then he just goes, "Oh yeah, that door was a little sticky. I can get my guys up here with a can of
oh
WD-40."
my
Yeah.
god, that was so good. Or when, like, again, like, when the engine's blowing and like, "Hey, yeah, my guys are saying that, like, you have to stop doing this. It's gonna blow up the ship. You should stop right now." Just just not even deadpan. It's not deadpan. It's just, like, very nonchalant, like, "I guess we shouldn't be doing this sort of thing." Or, like, when they get, like, sent there on the pods, initially, he doesn't wanna go, and, like, he finally shows up, and everyone's, like, freaking out because they just went through space. He's like, "Ah, isn't that a thing?"
Yeah.
But
That's
also, like, again, the whole idea that he's like, "I'm not like, this is clearly written for someone who should be Asian with this, like, with this naming." Um, that is even like there's a reference to that where if you remember, towards the end of the movie and he no, not towards the end of the movie, when he has to use the teleporter for the first time, the
yeah.
digitizer, and they're like, "It's not to you, you can do it," and he panics and freaks the fuck out. He's like, "Kwan's not even my real name," and he just he's,
Yeah.
like, trying to dodge it. It's like, "Oh, it's because he didn't think the part matched for him, like, it wasn't written, like, it shouldn't be him." So, just a lot of, like, really fun, subtle things go into that, which we're gonna have to get into, like, references that are, like, Star Trek references and also, like, other, like, sneaky references that happen in this movie, because there's that one, and there's a great one with Sigourney Weaver that I can't wait to get to, but yeah, we'll get to that
Well,
later.
I guess what I'll say up to this point, if
Mhm.
you've managed to stick with this long and you're still going, "What is this movie actually about?" Because I think I may have missed it and I'm afraid to ask. Really
Mhm,
what this movie follows is what is envisioned as like the original cast of, let's just say, the original Star Trek cast, right?
mhm,
But what would happen to them if they just got washed up and they didn't really do anything beyond this, right?
mhm,
The cast of this film is obviously part of a fictional universe called Galaxy Quest, which was a TV show in the 1980s, and end up seeing their lives after that initial heyday.
mhm.
I think in the movie the show only lasted, was it like 1 season or 2
Yeah, it's like
seasons?
when it went from 80 to 82
Yeah.
was its run.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so it's a short-lived sci-fi series, very similar to Star Trek, the
Yep.
original series.
Mhm.
So you get to kind of see what happens to these actors from the height of their careers and then seeing what they've done since then,
Yep.
which is
Mhm.
depressing and very sad to follow.
Yeah, and they show this, and this is where again, like I said, the movie is more of a spoof of the actors and actresses that were in Star Trek than Star Trek itself. Because when we first like actually see the crew doing things, they're at a convention, like a basically a Star Trek convention,
Yeah,
and you've got the cast waiting to go on stage, and we have everyone there except for Peter Taggart. He's
yeah,
not there because he is the William Shatner of the movie, and everything's about him. He's always on his own time schedule, and they play a lot off of all of the rumors and mannerisms that were told about William Shatner while he was in Star Trek behind the scenes. So they really try to ham that up with his character in this. So you've got all of the other characters are kind of like they're complaining about how like Peter booked another event without them. So you clearly see people just wanting the commander or they just want the captain, and the rest of the crew just kind of gets forgotten about, and they're booking these smaller gig after smaller gig,
yeah,
and they're complaining. So we go into the con and we really get to see a good amount of character development happen in this small scene or in these small couple scenes with the other actors because you've got Tommy Daryl Mitchell who is enthusiastic but also realistic about this whole thing. Like this is how I'm making money now. And I should just kind of like work off this while I have it. And then you've got he work out while I have it, but he's also not happy about it. I should say that this is as far as his career's gotten.
yeah,
And then, of course, you've got Alan Rickman, who is in the middle of, like, basically a freak out or a panic attack,
yeah,
that
yeah.
he used to be a real actor, and he, was it Cambridge? He was a Cambridge-trained actor?
Well, yeah, he was
Mhm,
in and his background in this was, mimicking that of his own career in
mhm,
a sense because he was very well known as a theater actor, and so he kinda brought that to this role. Like, his character also was a player of the stage at one point.
mhm.
Was it he played, King Richard III, I believe?
Yes. Mhm, that sounds right.
Yeah, so he's clearly kind of mixing, this character with his real life inspiration,
Mhm.
but once again, that is Rickman in like, inserting reason where a script may not always have it, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So yeah, this idea that he was this decorated and well-known, respected actor is now he's this
Re
is
reduced to this.
yes, yes. Yeah, well, it just reminds you of, just how real these things were for the original
Mhm.
Star Trek actors, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that they ended up being what this cast ended up being, in this portrayal,
Mhm.
but it definitely played out the dynamic of what happened, um, between Shatner and the rest of the cast.
Mhm.
And so they really did play that up quite a bit,
Yeah.
um, which, yeah, makes it feel more real, honestly.
Completely, and then you had, like, especially with Sigourney Weaver's character and how basically when you look at a lot of the early female characters in Star Trek, I don't wanna say early, it's a lot of Star Trek female characters, they're, like, basically forced into these form-fitting uniforms, and some of them aren't even uniforms. I remember, what was it, Deanna didn't get an actual uniform in The Next Generation until, like, what, season 7?
Yeah,
Where she like, literally the last season of the show, she gets to stop being draped in velvet for her entire time on screen. But,
yeah.
Weaver makes a comment on how, like, uh, at least the thing she says to Tommy, like, "You know, at least you had a part where people actually ask you about what you're doing, because I just got a 6 paragraph interview about how big my boobs are and how they fit into my uniform," which
Oh,
is apparently something that actually happened to Jerry Ryan.
yes, 7 of
Um
9. Yep.
Mhm,
Yep, that's
and
exactly what happened to her. It's like a 6 paragraph thing just about how her
yeah,
boobs fit in the
just in
suit.
there, which is ridiculous. Like, are you kidding? Like, that's what you focus on this whole time you're talking to her? She gets like, I mean, Jerry Ryan is also fantastic actress, gets reduced to that in an editorial. But like, this is also something that just happens to basically, it feels like every female on Star Trek or sci-fi in general, is they basically just kind of exploit them for their looks, which is a downside to the genre or a constant criticism to the genre, and this movie calls it out. This movie calls it out in a comedic manner.
Well, and that's what I found so interesting about this movie, because you gotta remember, we've said it a couple of times now, this is 1999. Like, this is a good,
Mhm.
I'd say maybe 10, 15 years before, like, Comic Cons are just pandemonium,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like, at that point, like, E3 was, like, the big thing, and that's for video games, right?
Yeah.
So, this
Which
wasn't, yeah, it wasn't even huge yet, so
mhm.
that's for them to nail, like, con culture and
Mhm.
and just where it was gonna go, that was an incredible,
It
call your
was.
shot for
Futuristic,
'99.
and that's why I think this is more like satire than it is spoof. Like, this definitely again, this is not like you don't get Darth Helmet in this movie and, like, his equivalent of a Star Trek villain. We don't have some sort of weird Klingon or Romulan up there. We get Saris, who is a well, like, fleshed out villain, and everything else is commentary on the genre, and and the subcultures that the genre has spawned. So it is deceptively smart for what the movie actually is. Or like
I would
I
agree.
take it back. It's deceptively smart because that's what the movie is. I don't say for what it actually is. That is what it actually is. It was deceptively smart, and it's a deceptively smart comedy that got passed off as a family movie.
Which once again, this movie went through so
Mhm.
many revisions and changes. What you're left with is surprisingly on point, right?
Mhm.
Is I mean, whenever you see movies go through that many changes, it tends to come through in a less than flattering light.
Yeah.
And
And speaking of less than flattering light, it is in this con scene you get when this is convention, you get a scene where Peter goes to the bathroom and he overhears two people who are just at the convention center and aren't a part of the whole thing. And they're talking about, like, everyone in there's a loser, they're nerds, they're taking this stuff way too seriously. The show's been off the air for years. All these actors are washed up. And how pathetic is it that Peter Taggart eats it up and absolutely loves being there
yeah,
when it's nothing but losers upon losers. And this was something that actually happened to William Shatner
yeah.
and made its way into the movie, which I think is also a good time to talk about the many Shatnerisms that made its way into this movie.
I well, I think I know of one
Mhm.
right away that was one of my favorites is when, he's fighting the rock monster and his shirt just magically comes
Magic comes
off.
off.
I I see you've managed to lose your shirt
Shit.
again. Because if you watch the original Star
Mhm.
Trek, it doesn't matter what fight this dude is in, his shirt's just gone,
Off. It's gone.
just melts away.
I think I remember even, like, one episode, he, like, got punched in the face, and suddenly, like, his shoulder, like, just gets the fabric just rips. And it's gone. It's like, "He didn't even get hit there. He was a guy with a bare fist. He didn't have a weapon, didn't have claws, he just got punched, and suddenly his shirt's just ripped open." Like, that's not how any of this works,
Yeah,
but it would happen all the time. Or, like, shortly before that, he does the combat roll when going from spot to spot, and everyone else is just walking behind him.
it's the
Did
combat
that
roll.
help? Yeah, it helped. "Where's your gun?" "Oh."
Yeah. One of the subtle,
Mhm,
Shatnerisms in this movie, is when you actually see the 1980s crew,
mhm.
and when he's sitting there in the captain's chair, he's got that very iconic Shatner look where
Yeah.
he's got
Mhm.
the hand to the chin and, gotta decide what my tactics are here.
Exactly. And then there are off-screen Shatnerism references, like when he was called the scene-stealing hack.
Yes.
Um, that's because you have a lot of things that William Shatner did, like, off camera that, of course, you just don't see necessarily, where he was known for demanding, like, additional takes to scenes when he thought that he was being upstaged by someone else, so that way
Yeah.
he could basically outdo them. Or
Yeah.
he would order rewrites specifically for his character if he didn't like what was happening.
Well,
Um
yeah, yeah, he specifically
Mhm,
took all kinds of stuff away from George Takei, which I mean, he's gone on record stating that too, that a lot of his character kind of suffered because of that. Um,
mhm,
and I'm pretty sure that's specifically where the scene stealing hack
yep,
line comes from. Um, and we're talking about a guy here that I'm not trying to say he's a bad person, but this is a guy that was just so put off with having his character die in the movie Generations
Oh my god.
that he wrote his own series of books called the Shatnerverse, where he
A
lived.
and if you purchase them on Audible, he narrates them.
He narrates them all. God, the
Uh,
Shatnerverse.
which, I
Yeah.
mean, like, I don't know, like, I think it's fun to hate on Bill. Like, I've met William Shatner. Granted, I met William Shatner, in his late 80s, and, like, I don't know, fun guy from, like, my little experience with him. But, like, I don't wanna hate the guy because, like, again, I looked up to, what he did in Star Trek. I loved it, especially the movies. Like, I definitely like, I don't remember watching much of the original series as a youth. It's something I definitely watched later on in life. But, like, I remember, like, watching, Wrath of Khan and Undiscovered Country when I was younger and loving them both. But so as much as, like, I enjoy Shatner for what he's done, yeah, apparently bit of a monster, or not a monster, but definitely a prima donna to the point where his co-stars did not care for him very much.
Yeah, definitely
Mhm,
diva behaviors, and which is honestly portrayed, quite well, throughout this film,
mhm.
and I think that's really the core strength of this movie is that you get to see how these characters, behaved before this idea of running into these aliens who thought they were a real thing
Yeah.
based off of the signal just floating out into space.
Mhm.
But that's what I kind of love seeing in this movie is how they can go from what seems like a completely irreconcilable. I'm having a hard time with words tonight,
Mhm.
but irreconcilable is the right
There
word.
we go, yep.
Um,
That's the
the,
one.
these differences, some of the actors from Star Trek have never gotten over, right?
Mhm.
Like they may have been able to, go from boiling to lukewarm on it, but it's still very real,
Yeah.
you know. Whereas in this film, they've kind of righted that a bit, and so it's
Mhm.
really cool to see just how that works throughout it because it is such a strange premise, right? I mean, it's a
Mhm.
premise that is so weird, but it works so well.
Does so well, and so when we look at that, we look at that core group of actors or that core group of characters movie with, Taggart, Madison, Tommy, who is he was a next gen stereotype with the boy wonder, sort of
Yes,
thing going on because
absolutely.
in the original series, Galaxy Quest, he was a kid.
Yeah.
Um
Shut up, Wesley.
Wesley. And then, Sir Dane, which, by the way, he was originally meant to be the references of him being knighted by Queen Elizabeth, but then Alan Rickman apparently said it didn't fit the character very well. So basically, every reference to him being knighted is gone, except whenever you see his name printed in the movie, including the credits, he is Sir Alexander Dane in all of them. But anyway, you have that, and then Fred Kwan. So those are your core group, and then the sixth man, Guy
Yes.
Fleegman, Sam Rockwell. Oh my god, this guy hams it up perfectly for this part. And he's basically the red shirt of the group. Is that he appears in one episode of the original series, he gets killed in a dramatic "Whoa," like fashion
Yeah.
of him screaming up at
Just
the camera
just before the commercial break, of course.
just before the
Yeah.
first commercial break.
Dude, you could not have cast this guy
Oh
any
god, no.
better.
Mhm.
I mean, I have loved Sam Rockwell for years,
Mhm.
and I think for me, like, I may have seen a later Rockwell before I saw Galaxy Quest, so maybe,
Mhm.
like, 3 or 4 years after, because after this, he wanted to be a serious actor. He wanted to be
Yeah.
more, less comedic and kind of
Mhm.
fall into more of that, but, like, seeing his talent on full display in this
Yeah.
movie,
Mhm.
which in itself is a hilarious reference because Guy Fleegman is an homage to Guy Vardaman, who is, like,
Yes.
an extensive Star Trek, stand-in or,
Mhm.
kind of, like, one-bit role kinda guy, and
Yeah. It was on Next Gen. He had a ton of basically, like he'd be, like, in his scene, or he'd maybe have, like, a line. You wouldn't hear from him, see very much. He was also, a frequent double for Brent Spiner,
yeah.
in the show. So, like, his character itself was there. And then the fact which is also great is the fact that he is what does he credit himself as? It's something as how, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was worded, like oh, like, he's, like, the 6th man, like, that's his designation as character in his show. I played the 6th man, and when he
Yeah.
joins them and says, "Hey, I'm coming along too," that makes him the 6th member of the crew of characters.
Yes, yes, because
Very
they had
poetic, very nice.
because they had 5 pods ready to go,
Mhm.
and then he is the 6th, yeah, added to that, which
And
is great.
you also have to love, like, when the Thermia or the Thermians meet the cast and they're in awe of every single person, and they get to Guy. They're
God,
like,
really.
"Guy." Guy.
Yeah, which dude, seriously,
Oh.
the just that whole exchange between the Thermians and the crew because,
Mhm.
at first they do, try to have that balance of we are actors, we're but we're also trying to fool them into thinking we're the real
Yes.
people.
Mhm.
And so they kinda go with this the whole time. And we're not here to go beat for beat for the whole movie,
Mm-mm.
but one of the strongest moments in this film is when they do finally break the news to them.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and when they were writing this, they were actually, told by the studio, "Maybe don't deliver this the way that you do because we don't need it to be
That
as
heavy.
serious as it ends up being."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but when Tim Allen delivered it,
Oh my
they went
god.
he did that so eloquently and so
Mhm.
perfectly. There's no way we can lose this.
Well, it's just that every time he opens his mouth in that scene to explain what happens, and when he has to finally explain, when he breaks down the fact that he's finally gonna tell, Malthazar what's happening, he's being forced to do it, and when he tries to just say, like, like, "This was we were acting," and then Sarah says, "No, explain it to him as though he were a
Yeah,
child."
speak to
Like
him as if
like,
he were a
"Oh,
child.
oh," and then they slam him over by him to make it explain, and every time Tim Allen opens his mouth after that, you can just, like, feel the shame in his character for what had been going on the whole time, and we finally see after the whole movie at this point, or most of the movie at this point, is you finally see Peter getting grounded. Like, he is now actually, despite all of the insane things that happen around him, he's now fully grounded in reality at this point, and it took this to happen to him, where he legitimately felt bad about everything. Like, you could tell, like, not only did my god, does he feel bad about, like, what he's done to the Thermians, but you can tell, like, he feels bad about how he's been treating his former like, his castmates.
Oh,
Everything has finally just come to a head for Taggart at this moment.
which is that's why, like, these people went from being, non-heroes to being
Mhm.
absolute banner heroes.
Yeah.
And that's why, it's important not to go through it beat to beat because this
Mhm.
is this is such a highly revered film amongst
Yeah.
Star Trek fans that I think,
Mhm.
like, in one of these previous, fan polls, it was voted as the 7th best Star Trek film of all time.
I mean, Will Wheaton has said this is his favorite Star Trek movie.
Uh, seriously, it's
Mhm.
it's a it's a wonderful bit of sci-fi that is
Completely.
it's surprisingly under the radar.
It is, and again, like, the amount of Star Trek, like, cast that actually loves this movie. Originally, Sir Patrick Stewart himself said he wasn't gonna see the movie because he had heard it was me making fun of Star Trek. He's like, "I can't do that. Like, I love the property too much. It's too big of my life. I don't think I could do it." And then I think someone finally convinced him to go see the movie, and he sees it, and he's like, "This is brilliant. I'm so happy I saw this movie. This was." Like, he loves this movie. It's just so great for how many people again, it almost feels like a love letter to the people in the industry and to the actors who are in Star Trek, because it tells a little bit of their story with a lot of fun sci-fi element to it.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's a
Mhm,
perfect combination of the realities of the industry while still telling a compelling story with
mhm.
that backdrop. And once again, I think that this has that same effect. I know I've said it once again or once before, but it's the same idea of attaching Sean Connery to Indiana Jones
Mhm.
and then having, Alan Rickman attached to this. Like, there's so much just actual believable reasoning behind why people behave they do in this film.
It is, and, on that note too, do you think of like when they first go to land to find a new beryllium sphere, because like we said, they did blow up the other one. Um they get there, and this is one of those moments where like Tim Allen was so dedicated to the idea that this has to also be a good science fiction movie, where he's like, wait a second, like in any like science fiction show, they would come to this in like, a space suit or a normal suit, and they would test to see if the atmosphere was breathable, and they would take the helmet off and they'd go about exploring. And that's where, like, the director's like, "Well, like, yeah, like, that would happen, but, like, that's not like, we don't have suits to do that." And the cast is like, "No, no, no, we'll handle it, we'll handle it." So you get the guy Fleegman freak out, like, "You don't know what's out there. Can you breathe? You don't know. You don't know."
Yeah.
And then you get Shaloub just, "It seems breathable." And he just
Yeah.
walks out.
Yeah. She's breathable.
Seems
Yeah.
breathable. It's okay. So it's just again like all of these little things that make up the genre that the actors and actresses take such good care to make sure makes its way into this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of things that made their way into this movie, before we get too far away from the antagonist
Mhm.
of the film, so you mentioned the evil warlord, Saris,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Now, to some people, Saris would just appear to be standard alien. He looks like a reptile, he's got an eye patch, right?
Mhm. Which is also in itself a Star Trek reference.
And yeah, because of
Yeah,
General Chang.
exactly.
Yeah.
From Undiscovered Country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Saris ended up being a multi referential character because
Yes.
Mark Johnson, who we mentioned, the producer,
Mhm.
and then so there was a film critic dude, Andrew Saris, who hated The Natural,
Yes.
absolutely trashed it, just talked all kinds of mad shit on it.
Mhm.
So how did Mark Johnson repay him? He immortalized him
Made
as
him
the
the
evil
villain.
warlord Saris. Yes. Oh,
Oh,
but that's
brilliant.
okay.
Mhm,
All right. So what we wanted to do was once again, we didn't want to like, tell you the entire film, but
mhm,
one of the big things about this movie are all the things that we would like you to be able to observe. And maybe you haven't seen it in a while, or
mhm.
maybe you've never watched it. There are some things that you absolutely need to be on the lookout for
Ah,
when you come
yes.
back to this movie.
Mhm.
So,
Number one being the what was it? Would be call sign, or basically the fleet number of the Protector, the NTE 3120 Protector, and what NTE actually stands for.
not the Enterprise.
Yes, just in case, they had a lawsuit that could happen against them. They specifically said NTE, not the Enterprise. And when you look at it, it's actually a fun reversal of what the Enterprise actually is,
Yes.
because instead of having like that big saucer in front, you get those rounded bits for the rear of the ship, and then
Yes.
you have like the smooth nacelle is the front of the ship. So it's actually a kind of fun like completely flip of it. And unlike the actual Enterprise and the bridge where they had to like fantastically fake and flop about when things would happen, the actual set of the bridge did shift and move. So the part where you see them actually like fly and flip over, that's because the set moved. They didn't
Yeah.
have to fake that.
Yeah. They made a
Mhm,
fully like functional, movable, yeah, yeah, deck where they could actually fall over and have it look natural than
mhm.
trying to choreograph 15 people while reacting at the same time.
Yeah, and thankfully Daryl Mitchell didn't actually break his arm when
No,
that happened.
no. Yeah, and actually, this is actually leads into what to
Mhm,
watch for next time, because there are very distinct choices in when you see like things in this movie from like the 1980s versus going on to like Saris's ship
mhm,
and then being on the Protector itself. So when you look at the 1980s look of the show,
mhm.
because they give you a couple clips, you see it in the beginning and then you see it referenced. Well, there's like this gray slash blue kind of hue to
Mhm.
the 80s show. So it clearly distinguishes it like, yeah, this is meant to be grainier, look
Yeah.
older, right?
Mhm.
Whereas that like the new scenes on the Protector, of course, yeah, you like flashy and
Mhm.
metallic and all that good stuff. But when you look at the tonal changes, when you look at Saris's ship, it specifically is always like green hued and
Ah.
like, kinda sickly looking,
Huh,
and so the next time you watch it, take a look at the lighting because it's very specific. They were absolutely deliberate in how they did this. So,
interesting.
definitely a fun thing to check out next time.
Yeah, as much as I've watched this movie, like, I remember definitely picked up on, like, the blue hue and all the flashback and the historical document scenes, but I don't
Yes.
think I picked up on the sliminess of Ceres's ship.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's deliberate. They've admitted it. It's supposed to look that way. So oh, but one of
Mhm,
my favorite things to look out for in this movie
mhm.
would be Alexander Dane's headpiece.
Yes.
Dr. Lazarus's looking, like, octopus-looking head
Yep,
that he has.
and how it never comes off.
It never
Not for
comes off.
one scene. Just like Dredd's helmet, that thing is on the whole time.
Well, I mean, even in the scenes when, like, they leave the convention and it's, like,
Mhm.
Sigourney Weaver and Rickman just talking to each other over
Yep,
the
from each
phone,
other's apartments, yep.
he's still
He
wearing
still
it.
has it.
And the whole idea from Rickman was that, it was supposed to look, like, campy enough so that it was believable as, like, a set piece, but then also something that he could put on himself when,
Mhm.
not having to rely on, like, a makeup team to do it. Like, that was his reasoning behind this. And so it made sense that he he'd be wearing it outside of
He
the
would be.
outside of appearances because he could put it on himself.
Yeah, very easily, and, oh my god, like, his his absolute freak out every time someone says the Grappler's Hammer line. Oh
Yes.
my god, the con itself, how he, like, the first time he hears it, he just quietly
Yeah.
grabs, like, someone's picture, signs it, someone starts to say they get to, like, buy grab, and he just takes the
Yeah.
picture, signs it, "Get out of here."
I
Oh my
mean,
god.
I can't blame him for that, though.
No, not at all, which again, also makes the scene where he says the line himself just another one of those scenes where, like, does that have any business being as seriously good as it is in this kind of movie? Oh my god, when he breaks down and says, "By Grabthar's hammer, by the sons of Warvan,
Yeah.
you
"You
shall
shall
be
be
avenged."
avenged."
Just, oh, like, oh my god, now then you get to the point where, like, he's now, for the first time, really buying into his character, the exact opposite of what, Taggart had done in the movie, where he now buys into reality. Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant.
But that's more character development than,
Mhm.
even serious movies. Yeah, or I say
Yeah.
serious, but, like,
Yeah.
the ones that
I
the Academy wants to recognize.
Mhm.
You just don't see that, and in that moment too, I always forget the Thermian's name, is it Quiddick? Quiddick.
Quillick.
Quillick. When Quillick is, like, he's on his deathbed and he's, like,
Mhm.
seeing him deliver that line, he's like, "Oh my god. He's
Yep.
doing
He's
he's doing the
saying the
thing."
line. He's saying the line.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I can't believe how good it is. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
laughing at it, I'm laughing in disbelief of just how, like, I can't believe it's that good. I really can't. Like, oh, like, the amount of times where this movie pulls like, a monster truck, like, rally at you, and, like, you've paid for the whole seat, but you really only need the edge. This is
Oh,
one of
yes.
those moments, you're just right on the edge of your seat watching this happen, like, "Oh my god, he's gonna do it, he's gonna say the line.
Yeah.
He's gonna love it." Oh.
Which is why I love the character of Dr. Lazarus
Mhm,
because, it's not just that he has this ridiculous, hairdo and everything, it's also that he ends up being referential to Spock,
mhm,
and when they're going to get the beryllium sphere and they're on this planet, he's holding the tracking device
mhm.
upside
Upside
down,
down.
and he doesn't realize it until he's told this by the others,
Mhm.
and Tommy goes, "Man, I thought for a second you were actually
You were
smart,"
smart.
And
Yeah.
it's
Mhm,
a real reference to what happened on the set of Star Trek, when basically he was using the prop
mhm.
the wrong way because he didn't know
Yep.
how to use it. He
Yeah, no
didn't
one ever told him. There was no direction, so he just had it a certain way.
so it was upside down.
Yep.
Well, it was like the first, like, 3 or 4 times he used it, it was upside
Mhm.
down. No one knew any different, right?
No. Mm.
But yeah, and they make a joke of that, of course, but it's something
Yeah.
to watch for because then
Mhm.
you can see it in real time next time from the beginning.
Something else to watch for, again, I said one of my favorite references in this movie is actually when they're starting to go through, like, the underbelly of the ship, and they're going through, like, an air duct, and Sigourney Weaver says, "Why is it always air ducts?" And
Yep.
if you remember, she was in a very big movie where they had to wander through the air ducts looking for an alien that was trying to kill them.
Yes.
Yeah. If you
Yes,
don't
which is
know that movie, there was an alien trying to kill them,
and later there would potentially be aliens, plural, if you're still not
trying to
getting this
kill
one.
them, and then
Yeah.
eventually there would be an Alien 3 trying to kill.
You know what?
Uh,
This Tony Shalhoub, like plot line of throwing away this like stoner behavior.
mhm.
What I always love to tell people to watch out for is almost kind of like what we talked about with Beer Fest and the perfect drinking pose.
Oh, yeah.
It still remains in the movie. Well,
Mhm,
this Tony Shalhoub stoner plot line, we've talked about how it lives through his behavior and how chill he is, right?
mhm.
Well, it also still exists through the fact that he's got the munchies the entire movie.
He really does.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my
like
god. Mhm,
so the next time you watch this or watch it for the first time for those of you that haven't seen it, he is eating the entire damn movie.
mhm.
Everywhere they are, he's eating.
Yep, and the only
Absolutely
time you don't
hilarious.
see him eating is when it's not actually him.
Yeah.
Which is another thing, another hilarious, like, I don't know if they did this on purpose. Like we said before, Guy Fleegman is the red shirt of the movie. And throughout the movie, he is constantly afraid that he is about to be killed. He's just
Yes.
paranoid about it. And there's a sequence where Saris shoots multiple people, except for Guy Fleegman.
Yep.
The only one in that scene not to get shot is the one guy who thought he was gonna die the whole movie.
I mean, it's pretty funny how long that joke exists,
Yeah,
right?
just
Because I mean,
through
he's
the
on
whole
edge.
movie.
He's on edge
Mhm.
the entire movie.
Yep.
The entire movie. He's afraid he's gonna die, which is one of the best parts of this movie is right near the
Mhm.
beginning when they first get teleported up to the protector. And a lot of people know this one, but uh, not not always. And
Mhm.
right when they get transported to the ship and they get beamed up for the first time, uh, the Thermians appear without their appearance generators on,
Yes. Mhm.
so they're full on squid looking.
Squiddy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and during this sequence, Guy lets out this very loud and very long scream that that, that is unforgettable.
Mhm.
And apparently, no one told Sigourney Weaver that this was going to happen. so so the next time you watch this movie and
Mhm.
they're in the teleportation room for the first time, he lets out this scream and she is like you could just see how jarred she is from it.
Yep.
Like she physically shakes
Like,
because of
"Oh."
how scary it was. and and honestly, I find myself rewinding, not even for the reaction, just because of this scream that he lets out. It is
Mhm.
so funny. And
Oh my
it's a good
god.
like a 10-second
Mhm.
scream that he lets out.
Yeah. It just goes on and on and on, and apparently no one knew it was coming, especially Sigourney Weaver.
Oh, it is so
Oh
damn
my
funny.
god.
Once again, just a testament
Mhm.
to how hilarious, just the
Yep.
involvement of these characters
Mhm.
are in this film, and that's one of, like, for me, that's one of my favorite moments of this movie.
Yep. And when you look at, like, if you had to, like, compare Guy Fleegman to an onion or an ogre, because he is very layered in that not only is he a reference to a red shirt in every Star Trek episode, but the fact that Rockwell actually based the mannerisms and actions of the character off of one of the Marines from Aliens.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's based
Yes.
off of Hudson, over
Yes.
having this very cocky,
Bill
cocky
Paxton.
veneer. Yeah, Bill Paxton's character, like, because when you see him, like, he's got his aviators on, he thinks he's cool, shooting the finger guns, he's hitting on that woman in the in the back room, of the convention, and then you just panic absolute panic the rest of the movie, just like Hudson does. So just oh, so many references to like so many
Yeah.
great things.
Yeah. Dude, yeah. It's it is totally, an homage to "Game over, man." Yeah, it totally is. Oh,
hmm And
well,
I would have to say that this is a completely, again, just like we said with Beer Fest, very underrated movie. And a part of it did have to do with the fact that DreamWorks wasn't sure what they wanted to do with the movie. So it went from meant to be kind of like this PG-13 rated R like satire to a family movie to the point where, like, they didn't really even advertise it that much. I mean, you look worldwide, the only advertising that was done for outside the United States was that Sigourney Weaver and Tim Allen went to the premiere in, I think, Sydney in Australia, and, like, that was it. You didn't really see much for marketing, and because of that, you didn't really get a lot of traction for this movie. Granted, like, when word caught on, it did actually climb. Like, it opened, I think, 7th in its opening weekend, which isn't, Hollywood-wise, not great. A top 10 finish isn't good unless you're like 1 or 2. Um,
yeah,
so
and it
that wasn't good.
it did have this odd behavior
Mhm.
of making more money the longer it was out, which just
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
No, and
And
then it crushed in DVD sales too.
yeah, yeah,
Did
it
well
definitely.
there.
It totally had, like, the Serenity effect or the
Mhm,
Firefly effect, like, when once people, had heard about this through word of mouth and it already had left
mhm.
theaters, suddenly that cult following just exploded. And so when we start talking about, like, the legacy of this film, to me, what I think is really sad is that if it had come out maybe more recently within the
Mhm.
last 5 or 10 years,
Yeah.
I don't think cult is the right word to use behind
No.
how revered it is.
No, it would be bigger than that. And, like, when I say underrated, it is underrated. Even, like, you look at this from, like, a, sales standpoint because do you know what this movie's budget was?
Um, I do know the budget was around 40 million, give or take.
Yeah, 45. 45
Yeah.
million. It made $90.7 million. So it just doubled its money, just doubled the cost of it. Now, because we love the maths on this
Oh, of
program,
course. We love it. Yes, we do.
we have to adjust for inflation. And do you know how much money it made by today's standards?
So from 1999's worth to buying power in 2022, Joe, feel just hit me with it.
$154.5 million.
That's not bad.
Oh, not bad at all, especially when it had a budget of $68.9 million in today's standard. Not bad at all.
They call it a win where I'm from.
In my book, I'd take that money. Take it every day.
Well, I mean, that's usually the bets that a lot of these, distributors take
Mhm,
is that there was really no marketing for this, like we've talked about.
mhm,
I mean, the only thing that it really had was this very strange mockumentary about the making of the film
yeah,
involving the actors,
mhm,
and
yeah,
they're, like, telling it from the viewpoint of them having actually been on the show
mhm.
and retelling it as now it's a movie.
Yeah, 'cause was it called, Never Give Up, Never Surrender? Was that the name of the mockumentary? Or is that the actual documentary?
I think that was the one that came out later, which was, like,
Yeah,
2018.
yep, that's the actual documentary.
Yeah,
Um,
but
so
this is what accompanied, though, the
mhm.
marketing, so if you're
Oh,
wa if
okay,
so if
yeah.
so if you're
Mhm,
watching this, and you're completely unsure, you didn't see any kinda notes or anything preview-wise for this,
mhm.
and then you see this and you go, "What the hell is going
The hell is
on?"
this? Yeah.
It's just a completely and so here's the thing, even the studio admitted afterward, they apologized to the creators of the film, they went, "We totally got this wrong."
Mhm,
They said, "If we had somehow done what we did for every film that we back fully,
yeah.
completely different result would have probably happened here."
We should not have marketed this as Fox's next Twisted show.
Oh god.
We dropped the ball in this one, guys.
You messed up, A. Ron. You just did. But
Oh, man.
here's where I think would be a good place to kind of leave this one off, though.
Okay.
We've talked about how some other people, mainly celebrities,
Mhm.
have said that this movie is more Star Trek than Star Trek.
Indeed.
In terms of its legacy, Joe, do you agree with that assessment? Yes or no? Or rather,
Um,
let's just skip yes or no and leave it an open-ended question. How do you feel about that?
I don't think it's I think it's more Star Trek than some Star Trek, but not all Star Trek. I think I think it's more Star Trek than Star Trek in the same terms that, um, the Orville was more Star Trek than Discovery is or what I would say was, because I haven't watched the latest of Discovery, and I will say that, like, the last season I saw was getting better, but it
Yeah.
wasn't enough to sell me on to keep watching. Um, but the first 2 seasons of the Orville was much more Star Trek, just with dick and fart jokes, than Discovery was, and when you look at this, like, at the time, like, if you wanted to compare it to, like, what was out, maybe Star Trek Enterprise was out at the time. Enterprise was very Star Trek. It just wasn't very popular. It didn't do very well and debatably had the worst series finale out of any Star Trek made yet. But, um, I would say it's not more Star Trek than Trek, but it is I would say it's just as Trek that it's just as Trek as Trek would be a better way of describing it in my opinion.
I agree with that assessment because it's hard to watch this movie and go, "This was an original idea influenced by nothing,"
Yeah.
right? Like,
Mhm.
so much of Trek or so much of Galaxy Quest relies on Trek to be successful,
Mhm.
from the non-fictional aspects of what the subject matter is based on,
Yeah.
to what actually happens on a Star Trek episode or movie,
Mhm.
and still managing to do that with its own little twists and, some of the flair that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So, while, yeah, and I think I agree with you that it's not more Trek than Star Trek,
Mhm.
but it is much more entertaining than some aspects of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah, I would agree there. Like, it's definitely like, because sometimes there's definitely, like, Star Trek gets caught up in itself, like, sort
Yeah.
of thing. Like, Star Trek's, like, goal is to show what we could be at our best. If we took the best parts of humanity, took that into space, and we tried to forward our species as we interacted with others, sometimes Trek gets caught up in that and gets a little too full of itself on it. Whereas this doesn't take itself seriously, but still has that idea of humanity coming together, overcoming our shortcomings for the betterment of ourselves and for those we meet. And it does that very well in this movie.
Yeah. It's much more buffet style of the
Mhm.
topics of Star Trek, right? Because
Yeah.
between the Thermians and, like, Ceres's, war against them,
Mhm.
they're the people of Earth are kinda stepping in to be
Yeah.
diplomatic in a way, or at least
Mhm.
they hoped would be diplomatic in a way. And so, like, that kind of represents some of the politics that you tend to see, because that's what
Mhm.
the Federation really does, is just kind of wedge themselves between conflict, and
Yeah.
trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
But then you get these little things about the workings of the technology, the ships,
Mhm.
the beryllium sphere, all
Yeah.
those things. And so that's why I really do think it's a more digestible
Mhm.
sci-fi for people, especially if you've never watched Star Trek.
Mhm.
This takes a lot of the best parts of those shows and makes it easier to experience without having the knowledge
Mhm.
of, like, 100 episodes, you know, of Next
Yep.
Generation, for example.
Precisely. And the whole idea that, like, basically you could have this group of aliens who have more advanced technology and could look at the show and base working technology off of what they saw is, again, at the heart of science fiction, because good science fiction tries to explain the technology within it to a fault, obviously, because you'll get to the point where, like, you just like, we don't fully understand what we want to do here yet. So we'll just say it's a positronic brain and he can basically think like a human, even though they don't describe exactly how a positronic brain could necessarily, work as well as a real brain. But, like, the idea, like, warp has more sophistication to it than hyperdrive.
Yeah.
Hyperdrive is plot driven. It takes a long time when you need the characters to talk, but you're across the galaxy in a half a second when you need them to be there. Whereas warp has a consistent time to it, It explains how you've basically got negative energy working with like or negative matter working with real matter to actually bend and fold space around the ship because you've never thought of it as space as the thing that's moving. Um, it actually tries to take like these scientific principles and says if you could make it work, this is how you could how you could possibly do it, as opposed to just space operating it up. So it's that again that idea that like this is what based off the science that we could think of, like this is how it would work. So it actually worked for the aliens when they built it because they had the technology and the know-how to actually put it together.
Yeah. And fortunately, you and I have the know-withal to have seen this film fairly early because it has been out for, good Lord, 23 years now.
Yeah, time does fly.
Yeah. So if you do happen to dip your toe into Galaxy Quest, we highly recommend it just because of
Mhm.
the deep subject matter that's there.
Yes.
And honestly, if you stick around and decide that you want to dig further into it,
Mhm.
folks, there is so much more here
Oh my
than
god.
just a comedy.
So much
So
more. And oh my god, the references, like there's not enough time for all of them. But I have to give one more before we leave because it's probably my favorite one out of everything. And that is the rock monster that they fight. Did you know that this was a Star Trek reference?
I feel like I do just because of
Mhm.
how many times I've seen the movie, and I didn't know if this was just a reference to some of the sets that they worked with back in like
Mhm.
California, but no, I'm not 100%
No.
sure on this one.
It was actually William Shatner wanted, nay demanded,
That's
a
right. That's
rock
right. That's right.
monster
They didn't have
to
the
end up
budget.
in Final
Yes,
Frontier, but
that's
they
right.
couldn't afford it, so they had to cut it, and it was out. And so they put it in the movie, and Shatner himself said, "I'm jealous that they got to make a rock monster."
I could just see him in the audience the first time just going, "My god, they have the rock monster that I wanted."
He does fixes his hair.
Yeah, of course. His shirt's magically off too because he got into an altercation before the film.
Yep, he had to roll while holding his box of popcorn, the popcorn flew everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, folks,
Oh,
there you have it. That is our pseudo review slash appreciation of Galaxy Quest from 1999. If we missed anything you can think of, because we surely did,
yeah.
definitely tell us about it. We'd love to hear about your favorite moments from this film. And if you do decide to pull back the curtain even more, we'd love to hear about other things maybe we had no clue of. I'm
Yeah.
sure it is absolutely out there. So until next time, folks, keep on dissecting.